5 children dead. No wounds, no struggle, just one mother smiling. This isn't a horror novel. It's a true story buried deep in America's forgotten past, where heat waves melted sanity and silence grew louder than screams. Set in the blistering summer of 1899, Texas, this unspeakable tragedy took place inside a modest wooden farmhouse miles from the nearest town. No gunshots, no blood, just an eerie peace, and a mother rocking in her chair downstairs, humming lullabies to ghosts. This is the kind of dark history that never makes it into textbooks, the kind of real-life nightmare passed down in whispers, never written in ink. If you think you've heard every haunting tale from the old American frontier, think again, because what happened inside the Ashford house still sends chills through historians, investigators, and anyone who dares to look too closely. This is a forgotten true crime, an unsolved mystery, and above all, a mother's quiet descent into madness, hidden behind curtains and Sunday dresses. The heat that day was unbearable, the kind that makes the air shimmer, and the sky feel like it's pressing down on your chest. At exactly 2:46 p.m. in a small wind-beaten Texas town, a neighbour knocked on the door of the Ashford home. After noticing something strange, no sound, no movement, not even the cries of baby Noah. When the door creaked open, Lydia Ashford appeared in her Sunday dress, hair neatly pinned, her expression calm too calm. "They're all asleep," she whispered. Finally. That was the moment everything shattered. What looked like a peaceful afternoon on the frontier would soon be remembered as one of the most haunting true stories in American history. And the horror wasn't in what people saw. It was in what they hadn't seen until it was far too late. It was too quiet for a house with 5 children inside. That's what Helen Marlowe kept repeating years later, long after the headlines faded. The Ashford house sat just beyond the dust-split road, a mile from town, wrapped in silence so dense it felt like God had turned his face away. The sun beat down at 104 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to make the porch nails sweat. Helen had come to deliver preserved peaches, something she did every Sunday, but when she knocked, no one answered. She waited, knocked again. Then ever so faintly she heard humming a soft, steady lullaby coming from inside off-key and slow. That was when the back of her neck went cold. Because inside that house was Lydia Ashford, a woman people once called gentle, God-fearing good. A woman whose life had crumbled quietly behind closed doors. And behind those same doors now sat a truth so unnatural, so horrifying, it would become one of the most disturbing real-life frontier tragedies ever uncovered. Helen never forgot that tune. She would hear it again in court, in her dreams, in the dead silence of memory. But that comes later. The door was unlocked, but what she saw inside froze her feet to the floor. Helen stepped into the Ashford home, like she was crossing into a church built for the dead. The air inside wasn't just still, it was wrong. The smell of lavender soap clung too tightly to the walls, masking something beneath it. The kitchen table was set for 6, plates cleaned, napkins folded, not a single fork out of place. The family Bible lay open on the counter, a pressed lily marking the page. And then she saw Lydia sitting in her rocker by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes vacant as if watching something no one else could see. She didn't acknowledge Helen at first, just rocked, back and forth, until she suddenly stopped and said almost sweetly, "They wanted to sleep, so I let them." That sentence would haunt Helen for the rest of her life, because no one was sleeping upstairs. They were gone, silent, pale positioned, like dolls in Sunday clothes, And the woman in the rocker wasn't just their mother. She was now the keeper of a forgotten American nightmare no one could explain. Not yet. No one heard a scream, not even once. In a house filled with toddlers and teething babies, silence isn't peace. It's a warning. That's what haunted Sheriff Whitlow as he stood in the parlour, hours later, hat in hand, sweat soaking through his collar. He'd known the Ashfords for years. Played dominoes with Silas on Saturdays, watched Lydia bring fresh pies to church socials. But nothing prepared him for what he saw in that house. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. Just rows of children tucked in with eerie precision, their skin already cool, lips faintly blue. It was as if death had arrived on tiptoe. And Lydia, she offered no resistance. She simply said, "The voices said they'd suffer in this world. I couldn't let that happen." Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that made grown men step back without realizing it. As news spread, people whispered words like madness, possession, even mercy. But no one truly understood. Not then. Because this wasn't just a crime, it was the beginning of one of the most haunting true stories in American frontier history, a case still whispered about in shadowed corners of Texas today. And it was only just beginning. But what drives a mother to silence 5 sleeping children without a sound? Without a fight, the newspapers asked it. The neighbors whispered it. The jury couldn't answer it. And even now, over a century later, the question hangs in the heat of that forgotten Texas summer, like smoke no wind can lift. What people didn't know then was that Lydia Ashford had been unraveling for weeks, maybe months, behind curtains and kindness. There were signs. Strange mutterings at the general store, blank stares during Sunday sermons, the rocking, always the rocking. But in a town where hardship was normal and women bore suffering like saints, no one looked closely enough, until it was far too late. Because what haunted Lydia wasn't just grief, it was something else, something deeper buried beneath silence and prayer, waiting to be heard. In her own words, the first sign of something breaking was in her eyes, not her hands. Pastor Bell said that years later in a taped interview no one wanted to air. He recalled Lydia Ashford entering the chapel barefoot on a Wednesday, hours after sunset, clutching a doll she claimed belonged to a 6th child no one had ever seen. Her dress was clean, her hair combed, but something was off, like her body was in the room, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She told him the devil had been whispering, said the flames were too loud. Then she smiled and asked if heaven still had room for the little ones. That was the first time Pastor Bell felt fear not of Lydia, but of what might already be inside her. Because this was a woman known for gentleness, for singing hymns, while churning butter, for nursing sick neighbours, without hesitation. Yet now her words trembled with something ancient, something hollow. The sheriff wouldn't believe him. The town brushed it off. But the truth had already knocked once, and no one opened the door. Not until those children lay still. Not until it was too late to stop what had already begun. She started hearing scratching behind the walls, but there were no rats. That's what Lydia told Clara Jean, the midwife who'd helped deliver her youngest. At first, Clara thought it was just exhaustion, 5 children, blistering heat, a husband working 2 counties away. But the details didn't fit fatigue. Lydia said the noises got louder at night, crawling up from the floorboards, whispering her name. She stopped using the upstairs entirely. Started lighting candles in broad daylight. Covered mirrors with linen sheets. She said the mirrors showed things that weren't there. Children she didn't remember having voices that called her mama, in accents not from this time. Clara tried to pray with her offer to fetch the pastor again, but Lydia laughed, a quiet, empty laugh. Then whispered, "They said the world's too heavy for children. I believe them now." And when Clara looked into her eyes, something flickered. Like Lydia was already part way gone, her mind stepping out, while her body remained to finish the chores. It wasn't violence, it was erosion, something slow, invisible, crawling under skin and behind smiles. And the worst part, Clara left that day without telling anyone, because in 1899, a woman who saw shadows was just tired, just lonely, just dismissed. She kept asking if time had stopped, because the clock in the nursery never ticked again after Wednesday. That detail came from Mary Collins, Lydia's closest neighbour, and maybe her only real friend. Mary had stopped by that Thursday with a fresh jar of jam, only to find Lydia standing barefoot in the middle of the nursery, staring at the wall like it had spoken. The crib was empty. All 5 children were outside playing in the dirt, but Lydia didn't even glance at them. She whispered, "They say I have 6, but I only count 5. Mary tried to laugh it off, tried to steer the conversation to chores or church, but Lydia kept drifting. She asked if shadows could carry voices, if rocking chairs could move on their own when no one's watching. She spoke of dreams where her children spoke in riddles and floated above the bed. Mary left that house uneasy, clutching the jam jar like it could anchor her to something real. What disturbed her most wasn't what Lydia said, it was how ordinary it sounded. Like this descent into something unspeakable had slipped in through the seams of daily life. And by the time anyone noticed, the line between real and unreal had already vanished. Some breakdowns happen in a scream, hers unfolded in whispers and unfinished lullabies. By mid-July, Lydia Ashford no longer answered the door. Neighbours claimed they heard her speaking softly to someone in the garden, though no one else was ever seen. Clothes were left on the line for days untouched. Milk spoiled on the porch. And still the town said nothing. Because back then, madness wasn't a crisis. It was a shame to be folded into silence. But behind those sun-faded curtains, something far darker than sorrow was taking root, and its roots were wrapping around the children first. By the 3rd week of July, the Ashford house had become a ghost before anything inside it had died. The children stopped playing outside. One by one, they vanished from the yard, their laughter replaced by an eerie stillness. When Mary Collins passed by, she saw Lydia, nailing quilts over the windows, in broad daylight, muttering that the sun was getting too loud. Inside she burned sage stolen from the church and scribbled unreadable verses in the margins of her Bible. Food deliveries were left untouched. The baby cried for hours, then stopped altogether. But no one knocked, no one dared. In a town where men ploughed land in silence and women wept behind laundry lines, asking questions was considered dangerous. Lydia had become invisible in plain sight, swallowed by her own home. A fortress of whispers. The few who still caught glimpses said her eyes were swollen, from weeping, her hands raw, from scrubbing the floorboards at midnight. She told one passerby, "There's dirt beneath this house, and it's hungry." That's when people started crossing the street. Not because they didn't care, but because they did. And they were terrified of what caring might cost. When the children stopped answering their names, that's when the dread became unbearable. Clara Jean said it like a confession decades later. She'd stopped by one afternoon with fresh eggs and knocked on the Ashford side door. Little Noah peeked out but didn't speak, just stared. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like the name Noah meant nothing to him anymore. Behind him, the others sat in rows on the floor, silent, unmoving, like they were waiting for instructions that never came. Lydia appeared moments later, but not as Clara remembered her. She was gaunt cheeks, hollowed-out hair, unbrushed skin, dusted in ash from the fireplace. She didn't say hello. She simply asked, "Do you hear it too?" When Clara asked what she meant, Lydia only smiled and said, "The knocking beneath the nursery. It's louder when they pray." Clara left the eggs and ran. No one went back after that. Something was wrong, not just with Lydia, but with the house itself. The air smelled of mould and wet wood even in drought. The curtains never moved even when wind howled. It was as if the home had become a sealed world, and whatever lived inside it wasn't entirely human anymore. By the time the sheriff was finally called, no one had seen the children in 6 days. That fact alone should have sparked panic. But in towns like Willow Creek, where everyone minds their own sins, it only raised quiet prayers. Sheriff Whitlow stood outside the Ashford home at sunset, the cicadas screaming louder than usual, the air still and swollen. He knocked 3 times. No answer. He called Lydia's name. Silence. The curtains remained drawn windows, blacked out with quilts and salt lines. When he turned the doorknob, it gave way without resistance. Inside, the smell hit him first stale milk, damp earth iron, then the quiet. Not peaceful, but suffocating. Every room was clean, impossibly clean. Toys arranged perfectly, beds made, not a footprint in the dust. But no children, no cries, no laughter, and no sign of Lydia until he opened the nursery closet. There in the dark, she sat cross-legged eyes, open, smiling faintly at something behind him. When he asked where the children were, she whispered, "They were too loud. I had to hush them." Sheriff Whitlow backed out slowly, and that was the moment he realized he wasn't the first visitor that house had swallowed whole. What they found beneath the nursery wasn't just disturbing, it shattered everything they believed about sanity, safety, and motherhood. After Sheriff Whitlow's report spread through town like wildfire, a small search party gathered at dawn, armed with lanterns, a Bible, and more fear than faith. What they uncovered beneath the floorboards would silence the town for decades, because this wasn't just a family tragedy anymore. It was something older, something unspoken, something buried for a reason. There were 6 shallow graves, but only 5 children. That detail broke Sheriff Whitlow. Beneath the nursery floor, hidden under warped planks and layers of ash, lay 5 tiny bodies, wrapped in the very quilts that once hung in the windows. Each had been laid gently, deliberately, with toys tucked beside them, like a bedtime routine that never ended. But the 6th hole was empty, fresh, dug days ago, and that's when they noticed Lydia's hands blistered bleeding soil under her nails. When pressed, she simply said, "The last one still talks. I can't bury her until she's quiet." The room went cold. Men who'd fought in war said they'd never felt fear like that moment. Because the 6th child, no one in town had ever known a 6th child. Not on any census, not in church records. But Lydia had drawn her face again and again in charcoal. Across the nursery walls, wide eyes, crooked mouth, always watching. From that point forward, the story wasn't just about death. It was about something that still might be alive. Something no one could name. The drawings weren't random. They were a sequence, a ritual, and a warning. As investigators peeled back the wallpaper in the nursery, they found layers of charcoal sketches, hundreds of them scrawled in frantic loops. At first, they were simple portraits, Lydia, the children, the house. But as the drawings went deeper, something changed. The eyes in the sketches multiplied. The walls began to pulse with images of a girl no one had ever seen, tall, thin face split in two. She was always watching, sometimes behind doors, sometimes crawling out from under the crib. Lydia had written a single sentence again and again between the drawings. The wrong one came back. That line shattered any remaining doubt this was just grief. It was something else. A mental collapse maybe, but a deeply patterned one. She spoke about mirrors showing faces that didn't match, about lullabies echoing from walls. She insisted the sixth child was borrowed from somewhere else. Not born, but given. And that the others had to be silenced before it followed them. At that point, even hardened men refused to stay in the house after sunset. Because something in those drawings looked back. When Father Alden arrived to bless the house, he didn't make it past the front door. The priest, stoic, seasoned a man who'd performed exorcisms in 3 states, stepped onto the porch and froze. He said the air changed, said the house felt like it was inhaling. He held up his crucifix, whispered a prayer, and the front door creaked open by itself. That's when he saw the child. Not one of the 5. Not the baby. This one stood in the hallway, pale, barefoot, head tilted in that way only broken dolls do. She smiled, and the moment he blinked, she was gone. Father Alden backed away, trembling, dropping his rosary, whispering, that was not a human soul. He refused to return. Weeks later, when asked what he saw, he simply said, the absence of God. Lydia's journal, recovered from under a floorboard, added one final fracture to reality. She had written she feeds on sound. That's why I stopped singing. That's why they had to be quiet. The town realized too late that silence wasn't safety. It was surrender. And that 6th child might not have been a child at all. The Ashford house was condemned within a month. But the knocking never stopped. Even after it was boarded up, sealed with police tape, and left to rot under rain and silence, locals swore they heard tapping sounds from the foundation at night. Always 3 knocks, always from the nursery wall. Lydia had been institutionalized silent, except for one phrase, she's not done yet. No one knew what that meant until a construction worker sent to reinforce the floor went missing for 5 hours. When they found him, he was curled in the closet, covered in charcoal eyes, wide open mouth, sealed shut with thread. He had stitched his own lips. When asked why he wrote on a scrap of wood, she said, I talk too much. The footage from his body cam was confiscated, never released. But one frame leaked online, a blurry shot of a small figure standing upside down on the ceiling. That single image became internet legend, fueling a storm of theories forums, midnight podcasts. But none of it explained the real horror. Lydia may have gone mad, but the shape she drew, the thing she feared others saw it too. And some still do. What shattered them wasn't what Lydia did. It was what she warned would come next. In her final written words, before she was placed on suicide watch, Lydia scribbled the same sentence 30 times in red crayon across the padded walls of her cell. It knows its name now. That phrase became a chilling refrain, online sparking threads, deep dives, and urban myths, but investigators couldn't laugh it off because audio from the baby monitor, retrieved from the house, recorded something no one could explain. Hours of static punctuated by a single whisper at 3:17 a.m, repeating once every night, Lydia. No one knew how. The house had no power. The monitor wasn't connected. But the voice, raspy, cold, slow, matched none of the children, nor Lydia. And when played backwards, the whisper transformed into what sounded like a nursery rhyme. But the lyrics were twisted wrong, invoking things no one could quite translate. The last agent to review the file resigned the next day, citing a sustained break from objective reality. Because this wasn't just about a haunted house. It was about a name that shouldn't have been remembered, but now it was. And somewhere it was listening. The house was boarded, the files sealed, and the town did what small towns do, best bury the story beneath silence. But some truths don't stay buried. Not when there are missing persons, reports, unexplained power surges, and a name whispered in static from baby monitors miles away. What happened in Ashford didn't end, it's metastasized, quiet and patient. And as survivors tried to piece back normalcy, one question echoed louder than any haunting. What if Lydia wasn't the warning, but the first to listen? That question leads us into the aftermath where the town's darkest secret didn't die. It adapted. Years later, no one talks about what really happened in Ashford, but everyone still acts like something's listening. The school built near the ruins never finished construction. The concrete kept cracking. Workers complained of missing tools, sudden nosebleeds, and distant lullabies in the static of their radios. The local archives where Lydia's journals were stored burned in a freak electrical fire during a rainstorm. The only surviving page was found half scorched with a single phrase circled, "You hear her too, don't you?" Former officers who worked the case either relocated or left law enforcement entirely. 2 are still missing. And the families who lived closest to the house, most are gone. Some disappeared, others moved without explanation. Their homes remain abandoned, mail piling up grass, uncut doors slightly ajar. The town published no obituary for the children, no memorial, no funeral. It's like they were never there. But if you ask the oldest residents quietly, without recording, they'll tell you the same thing. It's not the house that's cursed. It's the silence we let live in it. Some say the town healed, but not the children who survived. Of the 5 siblings, only 2 remain on public record. The youngest was adopted out of state and changed her name twice before age 10. The eldest, once vocal and defiant, hasn't spoken in over 15 years. She lives in a private care facility in Vermont, surrounded by locked doors and blackout curtains, spending her days drawing spirals that never touch the edges of the page. Doctors say it's trauma, but the caretakers say it's a warning. One night during a lightning storm, she scribbled on the hallway wall in charcoal, "She's in the wires now." Maintenance found every monitor on the floor flashing a name they couldn't trace, Lydia repeated across systems that weren't connected. And online forums still report strange incidents tied to the case GPS systems rerouting to the ruins, baby monitors picking up lullabies from nowhere, or children waking up with ash on their fingertips. These aren't just urban legends. These are data points. And if they form a pattern, the shape isn't random, it's intentional. The question isn't what happened, it's why it still is. Ashford's curse didn't die, it digitized. A decade after the case was archived, a YouTube creator uploaded a deep dive video analyzing Lydia's story. Within 72 hours, their entire channel, over 400 videos, was wiped without warning. Subscribers reported receiving strange audio files with distorted nursery rhymes embedded in white noise. Some said they heard their own names layered beneath. One Reddit user claimed they looped the sound backward and heard coordinates ones that led straight to Ashford's overgrown ruins. The video reappeared on a Romanian ghost forum 3 days later, but this time with a different title, It's Learning. Paranormal researchers who've tried to map the phenomena keep going dark. Blogs abandoned mid-post investigation threads left unfinished. Even university departments that briefly touched the case reported corrupted files, spontaneous power outages, or inexplicable system failures. It's as if whatever haunted that family is now riding the very networks we trust, not bound to a place, not confined to a body, just waiting for recognition, because once you hear its name, it knows yours too, and suddenly it's not just a story anymore, it's a signal, and you've already tuned in. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like someone was already there, you might not be wrong. That's the warning written in pen on the inside of a light switch panel at a foreclosed home near Ashford. Electricians say the place smells faintly of burnt sugar and old fabric, even though nothing's been plugged in for years. Paranormal experts describe this phenomenon as residual haunting, but locals call it something simpler, the after listening. A state where something doesn't watch you, it remembers you. One therapist who briefly worked with Lydia's surviving sibling claimed she couldn't keep clocks in her office. The batteries drained within hours. Mirrors fogged despite no heat. Her client never spoke, just stared at corners and blinked in threes. After their final session, the therapist received a voicemail from an unlisted number. The only sound was a lullaby and breathing. The timestamp showed it was left at 3:17 a.m., the same time Lydia had scribbled in her journal the night her parents vanished. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe trauma isn't the only thing that lingers. Maybe memory itself becomes a door, and some doors don't close. They just wait for you to open them again. This isn't just about what happened to Lydia. It's about what happens after you learn her name. That's the warning buried deep in an old forum thread written by a user who hasn't posted since. Many viewers report strange feelings after watching this very video. Cold spots disconnected devices, turning on whispers in completely silent rooms. One person emailed saying they kept hearing the sound of pages turning behind them, but when they looked, there were no books open. Another claimed their reflection blinked when they didn't. Whether it's shared delusion or something far more ancient riding the algorithms, one thing's clear: some stories want to be forgotten while others fight to be retold. And Lydia's, it's not done with you. That's why you'll check your lights tonight, why you'll glance twice at your screen before turning it off. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to wonder if you've really been alone this whole time. Because the scariest stories aren't the ones we hear. They're the ones that follow us home. If this story unsettled you, that's because deep down we all fear the same thing. Not ghosts or monsters, but being watched by something we can't explain and can't escape. Lydia's case forces us to ask, what if the stories we dismiss as legends are echoes waiting to be believed? And what if hitting play was all it needed to find you? But here's the truth. You're still in control. The scariest tales lose their power when we speak them aloud, when we share them, dissect them, question them. So, if this gave you chills, don't scroll in silence. Drop a comment with the part that haunted you most. Save this video for later, because some details only hit on the second watch, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because this channel doesn't just tell true stories, we unlock what others are too afraid to say. And once you've heard it, you're part of it now.